Chapter 45. Sitting in her room, Ayianna brushed her hair, the fragrant oil from her bath still drying on her skin. She inhaled its delicate flowery scent. The public bath hadn't been as humiliating the second time, and the hot water had been relaxing after Tarina's grueling practice. She glanced at the mirror and decided to leave her hair down. The day had passed without a word from Desmond. He'd made an empty promise. She stood and pulled the linen dress over her shoulders. The muscles in her arms and legs burned softly. A relished feeling, a feeling of freedom. She smiled. Time for dinner. Vian's laughter carried through the halls. What was she missing? Ayianna hurried into the private dining chambers. A marble circular table filled the room. Vian and Kale sat along the right side, talking with a third man, a Haruzo. Kale glanced up. His features softened and a smile played at his lips. He stood as he did the others. "Good evening, Ayianna." "Hi." Her face burned. "Have I missed dinner?" "No," Vian smiled. He strode over to her side and took her by the elbow. "Let me introduce Tarek. He will be our guide." Tarek smiled. His amber eyes were kind like Saeed's, but fiercer. Thick black sideburns framed his face and flowed into his wild curly hair. He bowed graciously, then took her hand and kissed it. "A pleasure to finally meet you," she said as she sought how to respond. "Nice of you to join us." Could she have been any more dull? Well, it took some convincing, but Kale and Vian think likewise. He and the others returned to their seats. "Have you enjoyed your stay?" "It's been great, thank you." Ayianna sat in the polished wood chairs. "How has the research been going?" "Wonderful." Vian shook out his nappick. "So wonderful that we are leaving tomorrow." "So soon?" "Well, you know how Kale is," Vian laughed. "We'll be leaving in a week." Kale took a drink from his goblet. "We still have to get a few supplies. I've got to find some sinew. It seems Bon Secours doesn't see the importance of the longbow." Tarek snorted. "We aren't much for any bows. Now you give us a good blade and we'll show you how battles are won." "Tarek." Kale shook his head, but his eyes twinkled with the challenge. "A longbow can outreach a sword every time. You might as well eliminate half of your enemies with the bow first, and then take out the rest with the sword." "True, unless one has a terrible aim." Tarek laughed. "I can't argue that." Kale glanced at Ayianna. "Speaking of aim, Ayianna needs to get some practice time with the noki." "What is that?" she asked. "It's a stone that will turn your target into salt." Vian raised his eyebrows. "Ever use a sling before?" "When I was a child, my brother and I would—" Emptiness overwhelmed her, but she pushed past it. "We would hunt with them, but that was a long time ago." "Excellent," Tarek smiled. "I'll take you to the practice field tomorrow. You'll remember how to use them quickly enough." He faced Kale. "I've got to get a few more supplies too, but it shouldn't take me too long." "Not if you've been turned into salt by then." Vian erupted into laughter, his voice booming around the table. "I won't be foolish enough to be standing where she can hit me." Tarek draped an arm over the back of his chair. "Is there a remedy for the noki?" Kale asked. Tarek shrugged. "Not to my knowledge." Ayianna glanced at Tarek, hoping she still had the knack for the sling. Her face must have mirrored her fear, because Tarek smiled and said, "Don't worry, Ayianna. We won't practice with the real noki." "Oh, of course not," she smiled. "Good evening, everyone." Ayanna's stomach sank like a brick at sea. She took a deep breath and glanced up. Desmond stood, smiling in the doorway. Freshly shaved, trimmed, and bathed, a slight fragrance wafted into the room. "Desmond, is it?" Tarek stood and bowed. "Nice to finally meet you." Desmond bowed. "Likewise. So will you be joining the quest?" "I will." Desmond strode toward Ayianna and pulled off the chair next to her. "I've been doing some thinking. We don't all need to be traipsing over the countryside looking for these ingredients." He sat down and glanced at Vian. "If we split up, we could free your father, Vian." He reached over and took Ayanna's hand. "And we could rescue Ayanna's mother while the rest of you find the tonic." Kale's face hardened. "Saeed wanted us to stick together." "But he's not here now." Desmond cocked his head. "We've made it as far as Bon Secours. You've got the tonic and you know where you're going. Why do you need us?" Kale frowned. Desmond smiled. "See, you don't need us. Or should I say, you don't need me." Aina stared at the black swirls in the white marble tabletop and focused on breathing slowly. Desmond stood and pulled her up with him. Today I am publicly accepting Arlen of Brighton's contract of betrothal to Ayianna. With you three as my witnesses, I make it official. Desmond, Cale stood, this is hardly the time or place for such things, don't you think? A need to protect my interests has come to my attention. But we're on the brink of a war. So we should stop engaging in life? Desmond laughed. I don't follow your logic, half-breed. Tarek straightened. There is no need for such slurs. We've heard your announcement. Go and fulfill it in the manner of your customs. The pounding in her head nearly drowned the voices around her. Her face burned, but she kept her gaze down and steadied her breathing. Doesn't Ayianna get a say in all this? Cale asked. Desmond smirked. Not where I come from. He turned his gaze to her. Besides, she knows the secrets she carries. She knows her place is with me. Secrets that killed her father and snatched away her mother. But those were her family's secrets. Now she carried her own. No one would have her if they knew about the harpy curse. She shuddered. Besides, Desmond cocked his head, what makes it any of your business? Cale's eyes darkened. Her brother asked me to look after her. Is that all? Desmond chuckled. Didn't I already tell you she is none of your concern? Her family betrothed her to me. Do you have evidence? Desmond smiled. Of course. He reached into his doublet and revealed a folded parchment. He shook it out. Cale glanced at the certificate. The room grew silent except for the spitting of the torches along the walls. His scowl deepened. It is true, but it lacks her signature. Easily remedied. Desmond snapped his fingers. Bring me ink and quill. Ayianna stared at the certificate as a servant brought the items. Her father's sloppy script scrawled across the bottom beneath an empty space. She glanced at Cale. His icy gaze bored into Desmond. His concern was nothing more than a vow to her brother. If he knew her secrets, he would despise her. If she signed, he wouldn't have to be burdened with her care any more. Instead, she would be on her way back to the plains to rescue her mother. The servant appeared and set the ink jar and quill on the table. He bowed and returned to stand along the wall. Ayianna swallowed the knot in her throat. Desmond knew her secrets and still wanted her as his wife. What else did the future hold for her? Oh, Saren, what should I do? She had to trust her father's decision. Before she could change her mind, she picked up the quill, dipped it, and signed her name. The torches sputtered, startling her, and she dropped the quill. A splotch of black ink bled into the parchment, smearing her name. Her fate sealed. She clasped her trembling hands together and sat. What had she done? Dinner is served. A deep-throated voice rumbled in the small room as servants streamed in carrying platters and jugs of mead. Ayianna's stomach twisted. She had no desire for food, only to run outside and be swallowed up by the evening sky. She needed air where she could see the stars and breathe again. Desmond, Vian lifted his knife and cut into the chunk of meat on his plate. I won't be going with you. Said will take care of my father. It's more important that we retrieve the tonic. Oh, Desmond's eyes narrowed. It won't do any good to return without you. I suppose we'll join you then. But what about my mother? Ayianna forced the words out. I won't leave without the prince. He frowned, but his gaze shifted beyond her. Ayianna stared at the plate set before her. She had sealed her fate for nothing. What had she expected? The promise of home had made her decision easier to bear. But now? The betrothal was official. It was over. She had signed her life away, committed it to a merchant. Could she have refused? The doubts and conflicting emotions burned in her mind and churned her stomach. No one would want her if they knew the secrets she harbored. If Cale didn't love her, then who would? Desmond slid the fingers over hers and lowered his voice. We can consummate the betrothal any time you're ready. Tonight, if you want. She pulled her hand away as tears sprang to her eyes. She'd grow to love him, just like the Queen said, just like her mother said. Did her mother say that? No, she said fools married for love. Her plate sat empty while the others ate. Snippets of conversation drifted her way, but the roar in her ears snatched the words away. In less than a week, she'd be embarking on a quest, taking her farther and farther away from home, from her mother. Did she even have a home? Was her mother even alive? No, she couldn't think like that. They would save her. Then she'd marry Desmond, and they would make a new home. But he would have to wait until they rescued her mother. The bars on her heart slammed shut, echoing in the silence of her soul. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her head and squared her shoulders. She had made her choice. There was no going back. Others had married for less. She would do this and make her father proud.